last few weeks. Officials on the ground say shelters are overcrowded and weak and might not last the next 24 hours. Aid groups are urging Israel to allow relief materials into the Strip, including proper tents, as Storm Byron approaches.
It poured all night and we were flooded. I couldn't move out as I have an amputated arm and shrapnel in my leg that I can't wade in the water. I started shouting and asking people to help get my children out, but they couldn't. The food was spoiled and the tent's canopy got blown away. I don't know what to do.
The cold and winter have heaped more woe on us, ruining all our belongings and bedding. I'm an injured man and can't bear the cold. Look at how the tents have become.
All right, let's get an update on the preparations. We can join Tarek Abu-Zoom, who's in Al Zuwaydah in central Gaza. So, Tarek, we got this huge storm rolling in. What are people doing? What can they do, indeed, to prepare?
Well, the situation looks grim as the weather, I think, as the initial confirmation that we've got from weather forecasters that the initial milestone of this storm started to appear here in Gaza. We can completely see the sky covered with black and thick clouds that are carrying rain that will shortly fall on makeshift shelters across the Strip. And we saw in recent hours that the sky on the horizon was quite covered with the light of thunders. The sound has terrified families on the ground who are living in makeshift tents, as you can clearly see in the background. They have been preparing in recent hours to face this new storm that Gaza will be the main epicenter of it, as people on the ground are expressing and sharing their concerns about their ability to face this new storm that threatened to uproot the vast majority of tents in Gaza. As initial expectations say that the speed of these winds that are expected to hit the Strip will reach 70 kilometers per hour. And we saw how families on the ground have been entrenching their makeshift tents and surround them by sandbags and barriers to prevent, at least temporarily, the entry and the flooding of the rainwater into their fragile makeshift tents that have been used for more than 2 years. And this reflects the severity of the humanitarian conditions. And everybody on the ground understands that whenever the rains will arrive to Gaza, these makeshift tents will not be able to withstand them. And there are no clear, let's say, drain channels in order to drift away the rainwater. And for many families, they believe that it's a matter of time and they will be certainly flooded by water and dirt, which has been one of the worst case scenarios that ever expected to see, especially during winter times.
Yeah, very hard for people to cope with the makeshift tents. Israel also not allowing any mobile homes to be put up. What's the impact of that?
Yeah, that's the core of the crisis. As a part of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement, hundreds of thousands of makeshift tents were expected and promised to be delivered to the Strip in order to house hundreds of thousands of families who have been left stranded after the destruction of their homes and their properties. And now the situation on the ground looks extremely very difficult to comprehend for families. People say that they did not receive makeshift tents in months, and what has been allowed to access Gaza, according to the UN reports, remains a fraction of what's needed to sustain the population who has witnessed several levels of displacement, pain, and agony. And for them right now, weather conditions have been adding further layers of suffering and hardships. Now they are forced to deal with it, but there are still more reports coming out from Gaza's hospital, specifically from doctors who are saying that the widespread of infectious and preventable diseases are quite expected during this potential wave of rain that will hit the Strip if thousands of people will be forced to sleep wet and cold, which is a scenario that has been quietly, it sounds like a nightmare for families on the ground. We saw earlier, this is very difficult to see, children wearing nothing but thin clothes, and now they will be facing such scenario of huge rain flooding the makeshift tents as no help was provided by local communities due to the shortages of the humanitarian supplies, and the significant rainfalls will absolutely bring further devastating consequences for them.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a very challenging night for everyone in Gaza. Tariq, we'll leave it there for the moment. Tariq, I presume, speaking to us there from Al Zuwaydah. Well, as a follow-up to that, aid groups are confirming that Israel is still not allowing in relief materials. The UN and other agencies are being urged to step in before the storm intensifies.
A number of issues have emerged due to the rise of water levels in key areas across the city. Several roads have been cut off, and shelter centers have been flooded with tents now completely submerged. We've been receiving distress calls throughout the night, and we still fear we may face a second wave from this low-pressure rainstorm. We'd like to remind everyone that the municipality does not have the necessary machinery or equipment to operate under these dangerous, windy conditions. Over 85% of our heavy equipment was destroyed by Israeli forces.
All right, let's speak to Oxfam now. Chris McIntosh is the charity's humanitarian response advisor in Gaza, joins us now from Gaza City, indeed. Chris, thanks for joining us here on Al Jazeera. Manifold threats here, and the most immediate is the destruction of what little shelter people have.
Yes, indeed. And what we're seeing right now in this post-ceasefire or ceasefire conditions situation is, I think a lot of the world thinks that things are better now. And certainly a ceasefire is welcome, and that does improve things to a certain degree on the ground here. But something that's not so easily fixed is the intense amount of destruction throughout the Gaza Strip that has left 1 to 1.5 million people in those makeshift shelters that you've been covering thus far on your broadcast. So that's well over 50% of the population of Gaza is living in tents or in some sort of tents inside of buildings that have been destroyed and are under very, very structurally unstable situations. These high winds and the rain do nothing good for those situations, and they put these people's lives in danger. They imperil many others across the Strip who are simply trying to seek refuge from the downpour that's inevitable right now.
And Chris, despite the destruction that you talk of, residents would in fact be much better prepared for this incoming storm if Israel had honoured its side of the agreement of the ceasefire. In a sense, it's a continuation of Israel's war.
Without question, the Israelis and their persistent bureaucracy have prevented us from bringing in necessary shelter and the sort of shelter that would provide adequate dwellings for people living in Gaza, who are just 1 to 1.5 million residents. So what we're seeing now, and if I could take you on the ground here and just pass around certain areas, particularly around Al-Mawasi, that's particularly dense in the population of tents, you would see not only canvas, but you would see blankets being used. It's really to this degree, and obviously a blanket is not going to do much against torrential downpours and winds that are nearly gale force. So it's a major problem, and no, the Israelis have not permitted these tents to enter the Gaza Strip, not for many months, and still the only thing they're allowing at this point is some tarpaulin, which isn't going to do much for people that need proper shelter. It might help some in particular situations, but by and large, the populace is bracing for a very, very tragic situation right now.
And we're not just talking about the issue of shelter, are we? In a sense, down the line, soon enough, things will be worse. There'll be issues like waterborne diseases to contend with.
Without question. These Gazans who are living in deplorable conditions, they're not living with dignity. They're unable to live in hygienic conditions. They struggle to find drinking water. As was in the report, a very common situation is food going bad, and so it's extremely difficult to live in a situation where you're protecting yourself and keeping yourself healthy under these conditions, and it's only going to get worse, unfortunately, as the temperatures drop and as the rain comes.
Tell us about your efforts, Chris, the efforts of Oxfam and other charities there in helping people prepare for the worst of winter.
To the degree we're able to, supporting particularly with the management of water, sanitation, and hygiene is one of our main programs that we execute. And this has to do with making sure that people, to the degree that we're able to, have drinking water and can separate that drinking water from latrines and from gray water, as it's known. This is contaminated water, as well as carrying out solid waste collection, getting the refuse out of the way to the degree possible, and allowing people to live with at least a little bit of improved dignity in their lives.
Yeah, it's all making it a very, very difficult situation a whole lot worse. Chris McIntosh, appreciate your time. That's Chris McIntosh, Oxfam's Humanitarian Response Advisor in Gaza. Thank you. Well, as we've been discussing, Gaza is bracing for these torrential rains. They're going to be there within hours. And as part of the US brokered ceasefire, Israel is supposed to allow in at least 600 humanitarian aid trucks every day. But only a fraction are being allowed in. Israel is blocking most humanitarian organizations from delivering food and medicine, as well as shelters, as we've been discussing, including tents and caravans. Reconstruction efforts have stalled, including the repair of water, electricity, and sewerage systems. Israeli forces are also blocking the entry of heavy machinery, which is needed to remove the widespread rubble. So let's speak to our correspondent, Noor O'Day. She's in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. And so, Noor, this is a natural phenomenon, this storm that's coming in. But actually, for Palestinians in Gaza, the end result will be a man-made disaster.
Indeed, this is a man-made disaster in the making. Israel could have at least made the conditions a bit better, as we heard from the guest and earlier from Tariq in Gaza. There are a lot of things that have not been able to go through to Gaza because of Israeli restrictions, including Israel's use of the dual-purpose excuse, as many have accused it, to not allow, for example, the poles of the tents that would make them stand firmer and perhaps withstand the weather elements, not allowing paper and pens because they might be of dual use, not allowing equipment to repair the sewage and water networks that the Israeli forces have destroyed over the past 2 years in Gaza. Those are all things that are clearly spelled out as Israel's obligations in phase 1 of the agreement. None of them have been implemented.
There will no doubt be quite a contrast just a few kilometers away because, of course, Storm Byron also set to impact Israel. How are preparations going there?
Well, over the past 24 hours, we've seen one alert in Israel after another, advising the residents of especially coastal cities and cities in the south and the Negev to take precautions, warning of possible floodings. Now, remember, these are cities that are not damaged. The infrastructure there works. There are emergency responders. There are plans in place and money that can be pumped into helping people evacuate, for example, if they need to. But nonetheless, there's a lot of concern that this storm is going to be very heavy. It's expected to bring in the worst downpours Thursday into Friday, and yet preparations began well more than 24 hours ago in Israel.
All right, we'll keep a very close eye on how things develop. Noor O'Day, thanks very much indeed. Now, more than 500,000 people have fled the border region of Thailand and Cambodia, where conflict has